Japan does not begin with a city. It begins with pressure. With fire under the ground, with mountains cutting the land into pieces, with coastlines facing cold water, hard wind and long storms, with islands pushed out into the Pacific, beautiful from a distance and uncertain up close. This land looks calm. A white peak above the clouds. A red gate in deep forest shadow. A village under snow. A stone lantern darkened by rain. A train gliding into Tokyo before sunrise. A ruined dome beside a quiet river. A southern sea turning blue under hard light. It looks still, but almost nothing here was built on stillness. Japan sits on moving ground. The earth shifts. The sea isolates. The mountains divide. The plains narrow. Space is limited. Safety is never permanent. And that changes everything. It changes how people build, how they move, how they store time, how they face risk, how they remember loss, how they make room for silence, how they make room for one another. In some countries, the land sits behind the story. In Japan, the land writes the first draft. You can see it in the cities packed tight, layered, high, measured in seconds, designed around limits. You can see it in the old capitals, where power learned to fold itself into wood-stone ritual and shadow. You can see it in the castles built beautiful, but never innocent. You can see it in villages under snow, in temple paths, wet with mist, in great Buddha halls, in torii gates, climbing mountainsides. In the way memory stays visible, even after the ruins are surrounded by a modern skyline. This is why Japan feels different. Not because it is simply old. Not because it is simply advanced. Not because it is simply beautiful. It feels different because so much of it was shaped under pressure. Pressure from nature. Pressure from isolation. Pressure from war. Pressure from rebuilding. Pressure from living close together on ground that never fully promises stability. And yet out of that pressure came precision, restraint, ritual, discipline. Beauty without excess, strength without noise. Japan does not reveal itself all at once. It arrives in layers: steel, wood, water, shadow, concrete, ash, snow, neon, prayer, memory. To understand Japan, we do not begin with postcards. We begin with the force underneath them. Then we look at what people built on top of that force. And the first place to see it clearly is Tokyo. Not because Tokyo is the oldest city, but because Tokyo shows what this land demanded from modern life. Tokyo before sunrise, tracks humming, vending machines glowing, office towers still dark, a city waiting to accelerate. This is where the story begins. Tokyo. Before the crowds, Tokyo is almost quiet. A train slides through blue morning light. Platform doors open. Footsteps scatter across polished floors. Station signs glow over empty lines of tile. Convenience stores are already lit. Coffee machines are already humming. Escalators are already carrying people upward. Then the speed begins. More trains, more footsteps, more screens, more voices, more motion. And still almost nothing spills out of place. That is the first shock of Tokyo. The scale is huge. The density is relentless. The movement never really stops. But the city does not feel loose. It feels held together. Crowds cross giant intersections in waves. No one crashes into anyone. Trains arrive. Doors open. Doors close. The next train follows. People line up. People fold umbrellas. People step aside. People disappear into systems larger than themselves. Tokyo is not just a big city. It is a city built inside limits. The land around it never offered the easy kind of space. Japan does not have endless flat ground to waste. It does not have the luxury of careless sprawl without consequence. Mountains take their share. The sea takes its share. The risks of earthquake and fire never fully leave. So the city law learned to compress, to organize, to layer, to calculate. You feel it everywhere. In the narrow streets packed with cable signs, bicycles, tiny bars, delivery carts, vending machines, and apartment blocks stacked tight against one another. In the high-rise districts, where glass towers rise over older neighborhoods that refuse to disappear. In the stations that feel like entire underground worlds. In the small apartments in the efficient stores and the lunch counters, with 10 seats in the alleyways, where 1 meter of space still becomes a business, a doorway, a kitchen, a life. Tokyo does not make room by spreading out. It makes room by becoming precise. That precision is not cold by accident. It is survival turned into habit. A city this large cannot function on improvisation alone. Not every hour, not every day, not at this volume, not with this much pressure. So Tokyo built rhythm. Train rhythm, work rhythm, pedestrian rhythm, retail rhythm, street rhythm. Even silence has rhythm here. On a crowded carriage, dozens of people stand inches apart. Phones in handbags. Low voices. Soft. No one needs to say much. The system already speaks for them. This is one of the deepest truths in Tokyo. Control is visible. Not always through force, often through repetition. Through expectation, through the quiet agreement that everyone is safer when everyone knows the pattern. And yet Tokyo is not only discipline, it is also energy. Neon signs climb up building faces. Arcades pulse with noise. Restaurants steam up winter windows. Late-night trains carry tired office workers home under fluorescent light. Crosswalks flash green. Screens, pomos, flicker over crowds. Tower cranes move above districts still changing shape. The city feels awake, even when it is exhausted. That matters because Tokyo is not merely a machine. It is also a place where millions of people continue to push identity through a highly controlled frame. Fashion districts break the uniformity. Tiny music bars hide below office towers. Bookstores fill entire floors. Shrines appear between concrete buildings, as if time opened a narrow door and left it there. A lane of old wood and paper lanterns can survive only minutes away from mirrored towers and giant digital billboards. This is where Tokyo becomes more than a symbol of modernity. It becomes a symbol of how Japan modernized without fully erasing its older instincts. The city races forward, but it still pauses at shrine steps. It still knows ritual. It still respects season. It still marks New Year. It still gathers under cherry blossoms. It still carries memory in places too small for a tourist map to notice. That layering is what makes Tokyo feel so specifically Japanese. This is not just any global megacity. It is a megacity shaped by a culture that learned to value order because disorder was expensive. A culture that learned to use space carefully because space was never guaranteed. A culture that learned to rebuild because loss was never theoretical. Tokyo has burned before, collapsed before, been bombed before, been rebuilt before. The skyline does not tell that story all at once, but it is in the city's posture, its alertness, its refusal to waste movement, its obsession with systems that hold under pressure. Even beauty here often appears through control. A perfectly wrapped product, a spotless station platform, a convenience store shelf aligned with almost ceremonial care, a narrow side street lit just enough, a bento box arranged like geometry, a pocket garden placed where no garden should fit. Tokyo proves something important very early in the story of Japan. Modern life here did not grow out of ease. It grew out of compression. Out of land limits, out of natural risk, out of population pressure, out of the need to keep moving without breaking apart. That is why Tokyo matters. Not because it is loud, not because it is famous, not because it glows at night. It matters because it shows what happens when a difficult land produces an urban culture of extreme coordination. The city never fully relaxes, but it rarely loses form. And that form tells us something about the country beyond the skyline. Japan did not become precise by accident. It became precise because precision reduced danger, because timing reduced friction, because order made density livable, because discipline turned pressure into function. But Tokyo is only one answer, a modern answer. To understand the older answers we have to leave the towers behind, leave the stations, leave the rush, leave the glass and steel, and go to a place where the sea, the hills, and the old weight of power shaped Japan in a different way. Fuji and the 5 lakes. A pale outline above cloud, a white summit catching early light. A perfect slope held so still against the sky that it almost looks less like geography than memory. Other mountains overwhelm by force. Fuji works differently. It enters the frame with restraint, and then it stays there. The longer you look, the more complete it feels. That is part of its power. Japan has many mountains, many ridges, many volcanic forms, many dramatic landscapes, but only one mountain became a national image so total that it could stand in for the country itself. Fuji is not simply high, it is legible. It reduces vastness into a shape the eye can hold immediately. Snow on top, dark body below. Cloud moving past, sky changing color around it. The form is simple, the effect is immense. This is where Japan reveals one of its deepest artistic instincts. It does not always chase grandeur through complication. It often finds grandeur through clarity. Fuji is the clearest example. A single balanced silhouette can carry the weight of religion, poetry, printmaking, pilgrimage, national identity, and private feeling all at once. It is a volcano, but it does not first arrive as threat. It arrives as presence, clean, distant, composed. The violence beneath the mountain is hidden inside the elegance of its outline. That contrast matters. Japan lives with instability, yet some of its strongest symbols appear almost impossibly calm. Fuji holds that tension perfectly. Beneath the snow and symmetry lies volcanic force. Beneath the still image lies geological unrest. The mountain teaches the eye to see peace, but the land remembers fire. That combination runs through the whole story of Japan. Beauty above, pressure below. Around Fuji, the weather changes quickly. Clouds drift low and erase half the slope. Then they open, and the entire mountain returns colder and more exact than before. Light turns the summit silver, then then blue-white, then red. Villages below go on with ordinary life, while the mountain continues to dominate every horizon line. That too feels distinctly Japanese. The extraordinary does not always demand interruption. It remains in view while life continues. Then the story lowers from the summit to the water. The 5 lakes spread beneath Fuji like quiet receivers. Here, the mountain stops being only vertical and becomes reflective. It enters the landscape twice, once in stone and snow, once in water and light. Morning mist hangs low over the surface. Trees darken the shoreline. Ripples disturb the reflection. Then stillness restores it. The whole setting seems built for pause. If Tokyo showed what pressure does to movement, Fuji and the lakes show what pressure does to stillness. In a country crowded by limits, stillness becomes precious. Space becomes meaningful. Silence becomes accessible. The lakes do not compete with the mountain. They hold it. They slow the eye. They make the viewer stay longer than expected. Japan often works this way. It does not always impress by enlarging the scene. It impresses by refining attention. Around these waters, the country feels less compressed. Houses sit back. Roads soften. Wind moves across reeds and branches instead of station platforms and traffic lanes. Yet the same discipline remains. Paths are maintained. Views are framed. Human presence does not disappear, but it rarely shouts. The landscape is not treated as something to conquer. It is arranged into relationship. Mountain, water, shore, tree, season, weather. Each part sharpens the others. That relationship is essential to understanding Japan. Nature is not simply admired here as something separate from civilization. It is studied, entered, bordered, approached, and given room to speak. The 5 lakes make that visible. Fuji rises beyond them with absolute certainty, while the lakes answer with change. Reflection breaks. Fog thickens. Light shifts. The mountain stays. The image changes. That is almost a philosophy in itself. Form and transience occupy in the same frame. And from that frame, the story moves toward the city that preserved more of Japan's inner rhythm than any other. After the national symbol comes the cultural heart. After open sky and reflected snow comes wood paper roofline shadow and controlled silence. We go to Kyoto. Kyoto does not introduce itself with force. It narrows the world instead. Streets quiet down, rooflines lower. Wood darkens at the edges. Light slips into alleys and onto stone with unusual care. A gate opens. A courtyard appears. Gravel sits raked and undisturbed. A temple bell hangs in still air. Everything feels measured, but not sterile. The city is not frozen. It is restrained. That restraint is the key. Kyoto does not compete for attention the way great capitals often do. It does not need to. Its power lies in how completely it holds a rhythm that much of the modern world has lost. Space is given shape through emptiness. Beauty appears through texture, shadow angle, timing and material. A wooden beam, a paper screen, moss against stone, a narrow lane turning just enough to hide the next view. Nothing seems accidental, but nothing seems overworked either. This is where Japan's aesthetic discipline becomes fully visible. Not as theory, as environment. In Kyoto, proportion matters. Distance matters. Silence matters. The interval between things matters. The city teaches the eye to stop expecting spectacle in the usual sense. Instead, it asks the eye to notice control. Control of color, control of surface, control of light, control of what is shown and what is withheld. That might be the best way to understand Kyoto. It is a city built on the intelligence of withholding. It does not give everything at once. A temple roof rises behind trees before the full building appears. A garden reveals itself from one angle and closes from another. A path bends. A screen slides. A room opens toward a view that seems simple until you realize how carefully every element has been placed within it. Kyoto trusts sequence more than impact. And because of that, time feels different here. Tokyo runs on acceleration. Kyoto runs on continuity. The city holds older ways of seeing without turning them into dead display. Ritual still has space. Craft still has space. Season still has space. Plum blossom, maple leaf, winter branch, summer humidity, autumn, light on tiled roofs. All of it enters the city as active presence rather than decoration. Kyoto does not stand outside time. It receives time more visibly. That matters because Japan is often misunderstood as a place divided between tradition and modernity, as if one must always be replacing the other. Kyoto suggests something more subtle. Tradition here is not merely the past surviving. It is a method of attention, a way of ordering space, a way of moving through built form, a way of accepting that beauty can be quiet and still endure. Walk through temple grounds, and the city seems to breathe through wood and stone. Move into older neighborhoods, and the line between house, street, shop, and history begins to thin. Lantern light-worn thresholds, narrow facades, tiled eaves, hidden gardens. Each piece contributes to a sense that life here was shaped over long periods, rather than forced into quick completion. Kyoto feels edited by generations. And yet beneath the calm is discipline, as strict as anything in Tokyo. The city's elegance is not softness without structure. It is structure refined until it appears effortless. Gardens require maintenance. Architecture requires care. Ritual requires repetition. Beauty requires limits. Kyoto can look natural to the outside eye, but almost every memorable scene in the city has been shaped by decision. What to include, what to remove, what to polish, what to leave weathered, what to let age visibly, what to keep hidden behind the next turn. That is why Kyoto matters so much in the story of Japan. It preserves not just buildings, but a pattern of mind. a way of forming order without loudness, a way of creating atmosphere without excess, a way of letting emptiness work as hard as ornament. Here, the country's relationship with pressure takes on another form. Instead of compression into speed, as in Tokyo, or compression into military hardness, as in Kamakura, Kyoto turns pressure into refinement, into the discipline of enough and no more. The city's temples deepen that lesson. They do not rise to dominate the skyline in the manner of imperial monuments elsewhere. They settle into their sites. Roofs spread. Timber darkens. Stone paths absorb footsteps. Water basins reflect leaves and sky. Even large spaces feel inward. They direct attention back toward balance, not outward toward conquest. Kyoto teaches that power can survive as mood as continuity, as control over atmosphere itself. And from Kyoto, the story moves into one of the clearest expressions of movement repetition and belief anywhere in Japan. A path of red gates climbing into the mountain. A sacred route that feels less like entering a building than entering a rhythm. Nara. Nara feels older in a different way. Kyoto preserves refinement. Nara preserves beginnings. The space opens. Deer move across the park with an ease that makes them seem less like visitors than part of the land itself. Temple roofs rise beyond broad paths and old trees. Timber darkens with age. Bronze holds its weight in silence. The scale here is not intimate. It is foundational. You can feel a country trying to give form to belief authority and cultural order at a size large enough to endure. That is what makes Nara so important. This is not simply a beautiful old city. It is one of the places where Japan first gathered itself into visible structure. Religion here is no longer small local or hidden within scattered mountain sites. It has dimension. It has mass. It has public presence. Great halls and monumental images show a society reaching for coherence, building not only places of worship, but a center of gravity. Tadaiji makes that ambition unmistakable. The building itself carries the weight of scale before one even enters. Then the interior opens, and the great Buddha stands or sits there with a force that is less theatrical than absolute. Wood, bronze, shadow height all work together to produce something larger than admiration. The effect is civilizational. You are not only seeing religious devotion, you are seeing a state learning how to express order through sacred architecture. And yet, Nara is not severe. The deer soften the frame without reducing its age. Grass, open air, old wood, and wide paths keep the city from becoming heavy in only one direction. That balance matters. Japan often presents authority and gentleness together. Monument and quiet, grandeur and softness. Nara carries those pairs easily. It feels old but not rigid, sacred but still breathable, public but never stripped of atmosphere. This is also where one begins to understand that early Japan did not build identity only through warfare or court ritual. It also built identity through placement, through the gathering of institutions, through the act of making one site matter more than the spaces around it. Nara does that. It shows a civilization trying to centralize belief and give the nation an early image of itself. The land remains present, of course. Trees frame the temples. Weather moves over open grounds. Light changes the timber by the hour. Even a place tied so closely to political and religious formation never loses contact with the natural world around it. That continuity is part of the Japanese signature. Human order rises, but not by fully erasing landscape. The setting still breathes through it. From Nara, the story needs another change of temperature. After foundations, faith, and early-scale Japan turns outward again into a city of commerce, appetite, speed, and street energy. The rhythm lifts. The frame brightens. The body of the country becomes more visible. We go to Osaka. Osaka speaks more directly. Kyoto holds back. Nara settles into age. Osaka comes toward you. Lights flare sooner. Streets feel warmer and stack up over canals and sidewalks. Food steams behind glass. Crowds tighten around stations, bridges, shopping arcades, and riverfront paths. The city does not hide its energy behind ceremony. It puts it on the surface. That is why Osaka matters in the larger story of Japan. It reminds us that this country was never made only by temples, courts, and restrained beauty. It was also made by trade exchange markets, labor movement, and the noise of ordinary life pushing outward. Osaka feels practical in the best sense. It is a place where people gather to do things. Buy things, move things, sell things, eat things, and build momentum. There is a different honesty in that atmosphere. Kyoto refines the eye. Osaka activates the body. You feel the city through volume, smell, brightness, crowd, pressure, the quick rhythm of side streets, the closeness of storefronts, the open display of commercial life. It has less distance, less formality, less insistence on quiet perfection. In return, it gives something else immediacy. That immediacy reveals another side of Japan's discipline. Order here does not disappear. Trains still run on time. Streets still function. Density is still managed. But the emotional temperature rises. The city lets appetite become visible. Restaurants open themselves to the street. Neon becomes part of the skyline. Bridges and riverbanks gather movement from morning into night. Osaka proves that structure and vitality are not opposites. Japan can contain both. This matters historically as well. A country compressed by geography had to develop nodes of exchange strong enough to move goods, people, and ideas across limited corridors. Osaka embodies that role. It turns compression into circulation. It makes intensity productive. What might feel crowded elsewhere becomes here a source of commercial force. And because Osaka sits so clearly on the side of life lived in public, it becomes an important counterweight in the film. Without it, Japan can look too solemn, too ceremonial, too distant from appetite and improvisation. Osaka restores the pulse. It shows that even a highly disciplined culture still needs places where energy gathers in open view. From that urban warmth, the story narrows again toward a form of power made visible in a single structure. A castle, rising in white. Elegant from afar, strategic up close. We go to Himeji. Himeji looks almost too refined to be defensive. White walls rise clean against the sky. Roof lines layer upward with unusual grace. The whole structure seems lifted rather than planted, as if the castle were meant to float above the earth instead of resist attack upon it. But that first impression is exactly what makes Himeji so revealing. Its beauty is inseparable from calculation. This is not a palace pretending to be a fortress. It is a fortress whose design became beautiful through discipline. Angles, walls, gates, elevation approach, routes, all were shaped for protection. The elegance comes from control. Nothing decorative is innocent. Nothing formal is detached from strategy. Himeji shows one of Japan's most consistent instincts function, refined until it appears effortless. That instinct matters because it appears again and again across the country. In cities, in gardens, in ritual spaces, in small tools, in food presentation, in architectural detail. Himeji makes it visible at monumental scale. The castle does not separate survival from aesthetic order. It fuses them. And in doing so, it tells us something profound about life on a difficult island landscape. When pressure is constant, beauty cannot always be a luxury added later. Sometimes it grows out of discipline itself. Seen from below, the castle rises with authority. Seen more closely, the paths and layered defenses reveal complexity. Seen in memory, it remains one of the sharpest images of Japan's feudal age. A nation of regional power, military hierarchy, and carefully defended centers needed structures like this. But only Japan could make one of them feel so visually light, while remaining so strategically hard. From Himeji, the film leaves the fortified image of power and moves towards something quieter and more fragile-looking, though no less enduring. A village shaped by winter labor and the long patience of communal life. We go to Shirakawago. Shirakawago. Shirakawago feels as if the country has folded inward. Mountains close around the valley. Roofs sink beneath snow. Smoke lifts lightly from houses built to survive season after season of cold. The scale contracts. There are no great capitals here, no commercial glow, no visible machinery of state. What remains is something more elemental: shelter, weather, community, and time. This is one of the places where Japan explains its strength from the ground up, not through monuments, but through adaptation. The famous steep thatched roofs are not picturesque inventions. They are responses. Responses to snow, load to climate, to available materials, to the demands of survival in a harsh environment. That matters. Shirakawago is beautiful, but its beauty began as necessity. The form of each house carries an argument with winter. And winter is everywhere in the feeling of the place. Even when the season changes, the architecture remembers it. The steep lines, the compactness, the closeness of structures to one another, the way the village sits within the valley. All of it speaks of endurance. This is not a landscape of easy abundance. It is a landscape where life had to be organized carefully and collectively. That collective dimension is essential. Shirakawago reveals a Japan built not only by elite centers, but by small communities that learned how to hold together under environmental pressure. Shared labor, inherited knowledge, building methods, maintenance, seasonal rhythms. All would have mattered intensely here. It is one more version of the same national lesson: limits produce form. Difficulty produces culture. The atmosphere deepens that impression. Snow softens edges. Wood darkens under moisture and age. Paths narrow between houses. Distant mountains hold the village in place. There is a stillness here, but it is not empty. It is worked for. The calm of Shirakawago comes from structures that succeeded from habits repeated long enough to become landscape. This is why the village belongs in the story. Without places like this, Japan might look as if it were made only by capitals and symbols. Shirakawago reminds us that a nation is also built in valleys in winters, in kitchens, in roof repair. In knowing how to survive together, its quiet is earned. From this village under mountain weather, the film turns toward one of the heaviest silences in modern history. Not silence born of snow or distance, but silence shaped by destruction memory and the decision not to turn away. We go to Hiroshima. Hiroshima. Hiroshima does not announce its weight immediately. The city today is modern, active, rebuilt, open to light and movement. Streets function. Water moves through the urban landscape. Trees stand in calm public spaces. People cross bridges, wait at lights, sit in parks, continue ordinary life. That normality is part of what makes the place so difficult. The city lives, but the past remains visible within it. Then the dome appears, broken, skeletal, exposed. A structure that was never meant to become a symbol, yet now holds one of the deepest burdens in modern human memory. It does not need explanation to affect the frame. It stands there and changes everything around it. River pavement, sky traffic all become sharper in relation to what remains. Hiroshima matters because it forces the film into a different register. Up to this point, pressure has taken many forms: geography, climate, isolation, military, order, urban density. Here, pressure becomes catastrophic history. Fire. Not from the earth this time, but from war. Destruction, not spread slowly across centuries, but concentrated into a single event that altered the moral imagination of the entire world. And yet Hiroshima is not only about destruction. The city also reveals something else that runs through Japan. Again and again, the ability to rebuild without erasing memory completely. That balance is not easy. Too much memorialization and life can seem trapped. Too much forgetting, and the wound becomes dishonest. Hiroshima does neither. It continues forward, but it keeps the rupture in view. That act of keeping memory in the frame may be one of the most distinct forms of strength in Japan. Not loud grief, not theatrical outrage. Something more controlled, more enduring, and perhaps more difficult. Continuity with remembrance. The dome remains. The park remains. The river remains. Modern life moves around them. The city does not pretend the break never happened. This changes the meaning of the whole documentary. Japan is no longer only a land shaped by natural pressure and cultural response. It is also a land that had to absorb one of the worst human-made shocks in history and still continue. Hiroshima gives the film moral gravity. It reminds us that resilience is not an abstract national trait. It was tested here at an undeniable scale. From that weight, the story needs a different kind of sacred calm. Not to erase what has just been seen, but to let it settle into a larger horizon of water ritual and quiet. We go to Nagasaki. Nagasaki climbs and falls with the land. Houses and streets spread across slopes facing the harbor. Water remains central, so does exposure. This is a city that has long looked outward, and that outwardness gives it a different texture from many other places in Japan. Nagasaki feels shaped by contact, by routes, arrivals, departures, trade, foreign influence, and the long tension between island identity and international connection. That makes it historically crucial. Japan is often imagined as sealed, self-contained, turned inward. Nagasaki complicates that image. Here, the sea did not only isolate, it also connected. Goods moved through this harbor. Ideas moved through it. Technologies, religions, and people entered through openings like this one. The city stands as evidence that Japan's relationship with the outside world was never simple. But Nagasaki also carries another layer of meaning, one that returns the film to the devastating reach of 20th century war. Like Hiroshima, it became the site of an atomic bombing. Like Hiroshima, it now lives with the coexistence of ordinary urban life and extraordinary historical memory. Yet Nagasaki's topography, its harbor setting, and its long role as a point of exchange give its atmosphere a distinct character. It feels at once more open and more exposed. This matters because it broadens the documentary's view of pressure. Japan did not only face inward challenges from terrain and natural instability, it also faced external pressures from global power, imperial competition war, and forced transformation. Nagasaki brings that outward dimension into focus. It shows a Japan in contact, in tension, in vulnerability, and in adaptation. The city's slopes, streets, waterfront, and memorial spaces all hold this layered identity. Harbor and history remain inseparable. The result is a place where openness and injury occupy the same frame. That duality is essential to understanding Japan as a nation that was never only isolated and never only connected, but always negotiating between those conditions. From Nagasaki, the film makes one final geographic shift. Far to the south, under a different quality of light, and beside a different color of sea, Japan changes again. We go to Okinawa. Okinawa feels like another climate of memory. The light is stronger. The sea opens in wider blue. Vegetation changes. The air seems looser, warmer, more exposed. If northern and central Japan often feel shaped by compression, Okinawa feels shaped by edge and openness. And that difference is exactly why it belongs at the end of the journey. Okinawa reminds us that Japan is not one uniform cultural block stretched across islands. It contains internal distances, different histories, different rhythms, different inheritances. Here, the country's southern position becomes visible in everything. From landscape to atmosphere, the horizon broadens, the color palette shifts, the emotional temperature changes. But Okinawa is not important only because it looks different. It matters because it carries its own historical weight. Strategic location, wartime devastation, cultural distinction, and long relationships with powers larger than itself all shaped the islands deeply. In Okinawa, Japan appears less as a singular identity and more as an archipelago with layered margins. The center does not explain everything. The edge has its own story. That gives the documentary its final expansion. Up to now, the film has moved through pressure, refinement, memory, discipline, and endurance across the main symbolic centers of the nation. Okinawa adds another truth. A country this complex cannot be contained by its most famous images alone. The farther one moves from those images, the more the national story widens. Sea and sky dominate the frame here in a different way. The islands feel more porous, more exposed to routes and winds beyond the main islands. That exposure has always carried risk, but it also carries identity. Okinawa's place in this documentary is to remind the viewer that Japan is not merely a vertical line of capitals and monuments. It is a dispersed world of shores, climates, and layered peripheries. And so the journey ends here, under southern light, with the country opened once more rather than closed. From here, the only thing left is to gather the layers together and ask what this land, with all its pressure and all its discipline, finally made possible. Japan begins in pressure and never fully leaves it. Fire under the ground, mountains dividing the land, narrow plains, violent weather, isolation by sea, the long demands of density rebuilding discipline, memory, and survival. None of that promised ease, none of that guaranteed beauty. And yet beauty emerged anyway, not in spite of those pressures, but often through them. Tokyo showed how limits became coordination. Kamakura showed how uncertainty hardened into structure. Nikko showed how authority entered the forest and became sacred atmosphere. Fuji turned instability into a perfect symbol. Kyoto refined pressure into silence, proportion, and restraint. Fushimi Inari made belief a path. Nara gave early scale to faith and order. Osaka returned life to the street. Himeji fused defense with elegance. Shirakawago revealed endurance at the level of the village. Hiroshima and Nagasaki kept catastrophe inside national memory. Miyajima answered pain with stillness. Okinawa widened the map and broke the illusion that Japan can ever be reduced to one image. That is what this country finally reveals. Japan is not defined by a single icon, a single era, or a single mood. It is a land where danger and discipline, beauty and loss form, and transience have shaped one another for centuries. The result is not perfection. It is something more human, and perhaps more difficult, a civilization that learned how to live under pressure without surrendering grace. That is why Japan lingers. Not because it explains itself easily, but because every layer deepens the last. The land presses, the people answer. And the answer remains visible everywhere.